Now let's talk a little bit about commercial composting facilities. I've worked with a bunch of them out here, and to be honest with you, at least in my experience, the products that are putting out are disastrous. They kill everything, right? So how have you broken into that end of it?
Well, it's typically people who have some type of medium to larger scale facility, and it's not been a ton of people that I've worked with, but that want to make a better product. They care about the product that they're making and want to do something better. So it's the people who I'm working with typically aren't like the big major composters like that are doing hundreds of thousands of yards a year. But I did work at one in Nashville, outside of Nashville. I have worked at a large scale facility, so I've seen the downfalls of that, and through my current job. So I also work with an organic certifier, and I see these big, large scale composters. We had one recently that just lots of contamination, plastic, glass, trash. We're saving the earth. We're saving the earth, but we're sending all this shit back onto the earth and polluting it. I've gotten so many complaints about the place in Nashville about glass, lighters, plastic, you name it. And people have had it put on their field or, brought in through the compost, and it gives us a bad name. Yeah. Gives compost a bad name.
Big time. And we out here, it's called dirty murk when they blend trash with green waste. And fortunately, for the most part out here, they're a lot more conscious about, really getting into the word out that, hey, that green bin is for greens. Do not put trash in it. And I think that the Californians as a whole are a lot more conscious of those kinds of things. Like I remember back in the company I worked with in Connecticut, who was also a soil fabrication facility. They had an amazing mine. So it was Hershey's chocolate plant was there from, I think, 1901 to 1980 or 90, and then they basically shut it down. So for that 90 to 100 years, they had taken all of the cocoa waste, the organic sludge, and they dumped it across the street in some adjacent land that they had owned. And then the neighbors started complaining about the smell, so they came in and put clay caps on it. And then because it was Connecticut, there was a lot of rain, so that clay would wash away and leave ruts and expose the organic matter again. So then they forced them to come in and top it with clay, and then top the clay with sand so that it would irrigate without, it would dissipate without eroding.
Yeah.
So for 100 years, they were piling this shit up. And I think it was like 12 acres by over 300 feet deep. And you talk about dream come true, dude. You could see the black layer, then you'd have the clay layer, then you'd have the sand layer. So I would get Pete, their lead excavator there, to say, Pete, take a scoop of this, a scoop of that, 2 scoops of this, and 1 scoop of that. Blend those together, run them through the trommel, and then add your compost in at 20%, so I could get these mixes for my clients. That was fucking amazing. And the only problem was they had a similar situation. They had so the way they made their compost was they blew air underneath it. So they had this huge long shed that was, 50, 60 feet tall that you could run a loader in. And then they just forced air underneath it, so the air was bubbling up through the compost. And then they had a leachate collector underneath that went out to a bioreactor to dissipate the leachate. So what I found was that when I was using their compost, I would have some of those issues you were talking about. I'd get, not a lot, but enough that people would complain about it, the little pieces of plastic and other shit. So what I ended up doing was I told them, I said, okay, don't use the compost. I want you to use the biofilter. And they would laugh at me, but they were like, we need to change the biofilter. The biofilter's been there for 25 years. So we're going to actually take your advice. We're going to, start opening it up and we'll set that stuff aside for your mixes, and then we'll add in fresh chips. And I think they had one other ingredient. Maybe it was like, it wasn't chips. Maybe it was hay or something to sop up the liquid.
Yeah, right.
As it broke down, my God, the stuff was amazing, and you had 0 contaminants in it. So that was fantastic. Now out here in Cali, they have this never-ending stream of trash trucks that dump the compacted green waste, and they do is they run it over with a loader and spread it out, and then they have an army of probably 25, 30 guys walk it through with the pickers.
Yeah.
And so again, it's not clean, but it's a lot better than perhaps some of the stuff. Like if you're seeing full lighters, that nobody's picked through that shit first.
Yeah, no, the material comes in, it gets ground up and put into a pile, no collection of contamination whatsoever. So anything that was brought in gets put into the compost, and then it gets turned. So if there was a glass bottle, the turner runs through and breaks that bottle up, and and then they screen it at the end and hope that stuff comes out with their 3/8-inch screen at the end.
Oh man, that's hard. That's hardcore. So they're not adding food waste back there, are they, into their composting process?
That on that large scale was food waste. Yeah.
So they did have food waste in.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing out here was they tried to take what we call GOM, ground up organic matter. So the grinders I'm talking about, the giant conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Nonstop dumping and just grinding, right? So we call that GOM, ground up organic matter. Super hot, hyperthermophilic. There is no separation of greens and browns. It just whatever the claw put in there comes out.
Yeah.
So very, very highly unstable. As a matter of fact, the facility out here, Agerman, that I worked with, started to get pretty deep into trying to figure out how to arrest the thermophilic process so that they could take this GOM and actually inoculate it and make a bio-intensive compost out of it. And so I started working with the yard manager, and on this one particular day, he was taking me out back to the oldest compost he had, because that's what I wanted to look at. And he told me that compost had been there for about 20 years, or not 20, 10 years.
Yeah.
And it was an enormous pile.